Hello, everyone, and you are so welcome. I'm Paul O'Brien, the Executive Director of Amnesty International USA, and I am so honored to be here with you to demonstrate our solidarity and to amplify the voices of women around the world who have been imprisoned and are still at risk for their writing. And of course, today we think of the Iranian government's detention of Nasrin Sotoudeh and the Saudi government's detention of Loujain Al-Hathloul. They are exposing how afraid those regimes are of powerful women writers, those who aren't afraid to speak. And so we're coming together to honor them and other amazing women writers. And we do so in proud partnership as Amnesty and in collective action to mobilize support with PEN America, RFK Human Rights, and many others. We're here because we want them to be free, and because we know the power of women writers in holding the powerful accountable. We know that freedom of expression and the freedom to write is a fundamental part of every woman's rights and all people's human rights. These virtual readings and what you're going to hear and our global solidarity with writers and political prisoners are an amazing beginning to these efforts and this campaign. So delighted to be here, and most importantly, delighted to introduce your moderator, who is an amazing writer in her own right, who I've admired for years and had the privilege of seeing her work when we both lived in Afghanistan at the same time. As the Paris correspondent for National Public Radio, Sarah Chayes provided award-winning coverage of the Kosovo War and the fall of the Taliban after 9/11. And then she chose to stay in Afghanistan for the next decade to try and help its people rebuild. She came to understand the devastating ramifications of corruption and frankly changed the way we think about what corruption really is and how much of a problem it is, including for human rights, wherever it is lodged. And she wrote 2 seminal books on the topic. Now she's shifting from an exclusive focus on Homo sapiens to the rest of the natural world, and we wish her great success in that and look forward to seeing her thinking. Sarah, we're delighted to have you as a moderator.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I just ask everyone to keep in mind Paul's emphasis on the word, on the power of the word. So all of you listening, welcome. We are going to meet a constellation of superlative human beings. But first, I would also like to extend thanks to PEN America and RFK Human Rights and some of the people, the individuals who are behind this event will be introduced later, but let me just call out a couple who aren't so visible. Jeff Kaufman and Marsha Ross, brilliant documentary filmmakers who use their art to promote human dignity. You have to see their film about one of today's heroines, Nasrin Sotoudeh. It's helped spearhead the effort of which today is a part. And please, PEN America's Veronica Tien, flawless in keeping all the cats herded and fed. We're linking generations here. For this event is not just an inspiring moment. We're entering a powerful current. So next, 8 young women will read testimonials from 6 women, Nasrin and Loujain, and 4 others who are in the thick of the fight, who are in danger and whose voices are stifled. After that, we'll listen to some revered elders reflecting on what they've heard. And then we convert this inspiration to action, for this powerful current flows forth from here today. The students who will be reading to us are Sophia Badiaco-Mayer, an enthusiastic junior at the George School in Newtown, Pennsylvania, aiming also at art and film with a mission. Malaika Kumar of Memphis is a sophomore at the Lausanne Collegiate Institute. Attuned to the bitter treatment of women in her parents' native India, she's passionate about today's cause. Charlotte Hampton, co-founder of Teens for Press Freedom, is a junior at the High School of American Studies in the Bronx. And Isabel Tribe is Charlotte's battle buddy, also a junior at American Studies and a Teens for Free Press co-founder. For her, as for Charlotte, media literacy is a priority. Wafa Noman, a senior at the King School in Stamford, Connecticut, is delighted to be learning here how to translate her commitment to human rights into action. India Norris, a senior also at the Lausanne Collegiate School, wants to spend her career in this field. Writer and Teens for Press Freedom activist Eamon Dilawar is at the Collegiate Institute for Math and Science in the Bronx. And Naima Hibrel Kidjo is an LA-based author and writer, also determined to forge human connections with art. So allow me just one thought before we begin. And it's a challenging one. I'm known for that. But I would beg you just to consider this as we proceed. I wonder if we can ask ourselves if it's always true that a victim of human rights abuses, for example, is necessarily virtuous. And if someone who has perpetrated dastardly harm can't ever also have been a victim. Because it seems to me that what's diabolical about the systems that perpetrate atrocities is that they force people to be either victims or perpetrators, or ideally, from the system's point of view, both. And that's the magic of the human rights defenders you're about to meet. They've found the courage and the grace to walk between, becoming neither victim nor perpetrator, but lights for us all. So let's listen to 6 full-voiced women around the world who are at risk and not able right now to raise those voices. Let's start with Sophia, reading a 2016 statement from Loujain Al-Hathloul, a writer-activist who's led the fight against Saudi Arabia's system of male guardianship with a focus on the ban on women driving. In May 2018, she was jailed for nearly 3 years on terrorism charges. Her release in February is contingent on her not speaking publicly.
Thank you,
Sophia?
Sarah. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really happy to be part of this movement. So since I turned 25, life has moved too fast, or maybe it's time that has moved too fast. In all I do, I'm inspired by my daughter. I want to offer her an honorable life. Criticizing some phenomenon in our home country does not equate to hating it or wishing evil upon it. It is the total opposite. Any Saudi citizen might be upset by incidents that occur in the kingdom, but that is only a direct sign of one's interest in the betterment of the country and one's hope to see Saudi Arabia as a global leader. By preventing mobility for women, you prevent empowerment, and you prevent women taking care of themselves. As one woman said to me, Saudi women are stripped of their identity. That's why driving is a key to independence. We need a generation that opens the door to women empowerment on all levels. Actual freedom of expression, not officials' claim of its existence. Political participation of citizens, lifting the guardianship of women. I sincerely pray for my country and for all its citizens, even those who have harassed my family and me. I remain very optimistic about a bright future for my country and its citizens. Loujain Al-Hathloul.
Thank you, Sophia. Now Malaika will read an excerpt from Pham Doan Trang's Handbook for Families of Prisoners. An author and publisher in Vietnam, she's imprisoned awaiting trial for allegedly disseminating anti-state propaganda.
Thank you, Sarah. Why should you read this book? The answer is short, because it is quite possible that someday you may desperately need this book. Let me tell you the following story. Though it is a true story, I'd like to call its main character you, for the sake of clarity and conciseness. One day, your son suddenly received an invitation sheet from the police in your district, asking him to go to the local police station, or local People's Committee headquarters, to work with the police. He accepted the invitation and went there the next morning. Then he didn't come back home, and you didn't hear anything from him. Several days, even weeks passed, and you were finally told by the local police that your family member had been arrested and charged with rape, plundering property, and murder. That's all that you heard. At least 6 months later, you were allowed to meet him again behind bars amidst police. He cried out that he was innocent. Police stopped him immediately. They only allowed him to send regards to the family. You came home and began to hire a lawyer, but the lawyer charged too much, and it appeared that he couldn't help much. He said it was because the police are too powerful. You had neighbors who offered to be witnesses to your alibi. However, when the neighbors came to the police station to give testimonies, they themselves got arrested. A few days later, they were released in bad health condition with bruises all over the body. They kept their mouths shut, but it was likely that they had been tortured in custody. No one dared to alibi your son anymore. Almost 2 years later, your son was taken to court and sentenced to death for murder. Despite his desperate cries that he was innocent and that he had only confessed as a result of being tortured and extorted. Deep inside your heart, you know for sure that your son is innocent. You vowed to save his life and your quest for justice began. You went from door to door, met all the people you could meet, did all the things that you could do to save your son, the prisoner in death row. Many times you were hopeful and optimistic, then you turned hopeless and pessimistic, then hopeful and optimistic again. Things went on that way for years.
Beautiful, Malaika. Let's listen to Charlotte and Isabel now, reading part of The One on the Balcony Sounding a Gong and Crying Out for the Sick by poet Zhang Wenfang. Zhang spent more than 6 months in jail for her online poetry depicting the realities of the COVID pandemic in Wuhan, China.
Thank you, Sarah. It's an honor to be here. The one on the balcony sounding a gong and crying out for the sick. The one following a hearse in the deep of night, calling out mama in grief. The one truck driver stranded along the highway, wandering without a place to return. The one who died while sitting up, whose family cradled their head as they waited for the hearse. The one who starved to death in their home during quarantine. The pregnant woman who spent 200,000 yuan before being denied further treatment when she became unable to pay. The one who feared infecting their family and so dug a grave and quietly hanged themselves. The one with no doctors to turn to, who feared infecting his wife and kids and so jumped from a bridge to end his life. The 90-year-old who waited at the hospital for 5 days and 5 nights to ensure their 60-year-old son a bed. The one who commented under a Weibo post begging for a hospital bed, "My family member just passed away, vacating a hospital bed. I hope this will help you."
The one who first cursed those begging for help, saying they made him depressed, but who later had no choice but to call for help in the same way. The one who posted hello when learning how to use Weibo in order to call for help. The one who covered their mouth with a scarf when being checked by the authorities and cried in shame because they couldn't buy a mask. The one who used orange peels as a mask. The one who went alone to the Civil Affairs Bureau to report their orphan status after their entire family, father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, died. The one who donated all the masks they received as pay in lieu of cash. The one who wrote, "I will meet death in peace. It is time to offer myself." The one who wrote, "I can, I understand," signed with a red fingerprint and then died twice. The one who said, "If I had seen this day coming, I would have said it everywhere, criticism or no."
Wow. Now Wafa will read from Revolution by Sisterhood by Belarusian writer and philosopher Olga Shparaga. She's in exile in Vilnius after being targeted in the crackdown on protest against her country's almost farcical 2020 election, contracting COVID in jail, and then once out being called to serve a second sentence.
The introduction. In prison, it was sisterhood that supported me. It meant that one can and should draw strength from caring for each other, from empathy and willingness to share with each other everything that is possible to share, from knowledge to hygiene items, food, and underwear. The Belarusian Revolution, which reminded me of the Great French Revolution, took its final shape precisely in this mutual willingness to help each other, showing how strongly freedom, equality, and sisterhood are linked. After 15 days spent in prison, I left the country. I had to leave because I had reached an extreme level of tension. Also, because I was sentenced to another 12 days in prison. What I feel now is the need to live in the rhythm of the ongoing protest. Of course, in Minsk, it is much more difficult, but this can be done outside Belarus as well. For example, by participating in work aimed at providing assistance to victims of political repression. Now, in a different, new sense, I do not know how it could be possible to return to normal life when so many of my fellow citizens, persecuted political prisoners, continue the struggle while living abnormal lives. In a sense, we already live in a new democratic Belarus. Yet this is not entirely true as long as Lukashenko remains in power and people in Belarus are subjected to violence. We are searching for the systems of support that cannot exist until we win. At the same time, we ourselves are the support. We are the pillars, we are the boundaries between the past and the future, which can only be crossed in one direction, forward.
Right. Now India and Amen will treat us to Exile by Ugandan medical anthropologist and poet Stella Nyanzi. She served 18 months in prison for her writings on women's health, sexuality, and HIV. She is seeking asylum in Kenya.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate it. Poem Exile by Stella Nyanzi. Exile, away from home, fleeing from political prosecution, fleeing with the bag of just a few essentials, fleeing with my children on my back, my 2 sons on one shoulder each, and my daughter on my back. Fleeing from the murderers, fleeing from the abductors, fleeing from those who kidnap women and men simply because we're in the opposition. Exile, a place to breathe, without fear of death, without fear of arrest. Exile, a place to dream and dream again of liberation. Exile, a place to tell stories of when we were home. Remember Baraka when we were home? Remember Raswa and Kato when we were home? Exile, a place to think about the dictators who have forced me to flee away, just as my mother and father fled away when I was a child, a young child. Exile, exile, they call me an exilee. They call me an asylum seeker. They call me someone waiting for refugee status determination. They call me a person who ran away from home. They didn't say ran away from home. No. They said she fled from home. And yes, I fled to exile. Exiled in Kenya. Exile from Uganda to Kenya. Exiled in Africa. An African in Africa, is that exile? Is exile about Africans in Africa?
Exile, dreaming of home, thinking of home, wishing to be home. The taste of my talking on my lips would be good, but it's a test I'm learning to forget too soon. Ha, exile. But exile will not be forever. Exile is not forever. Exile does not surrender. Exile is just a retreat to re-strategize, to tell my child, I gave you the opportunity to start afresh, to tell my daughter, now you can go to college. You want to go to London School of Economics, child, you will go to London School of Economics. To tell my son, you will have a mother every day overseeing your homework and teaching you those chess moves. You play chess, but you don't play as well as you would have played if you were playing against your mother every night. To tell my other son, hey son, exile is a moment for you not to wait at night. Has mama come home? Will mama come home? Have the police taken mama away? Exile. I am an exilee with a daughter age 16 and 2 twin sons age 13. And yet I'm dreaming of a day when I will return home, not an exilee, but a Ugandan living in Uganda, an African living in Africa, a world citizen living in the world. I refuse your name as an exilee. My name is Stella Nyanzi.
Wow, what great readings too. You students are doing fantastic. Now get this. Having begun with Saudi Arabia, we end with Iran and Nasrin Sotoudeh. The governments of these two countries are raining death on an entire region in their bitter geostrategic rivalry. And here come these two magnificent women uniting their countries in the cause of life. Naima will read a letter Nasrin wrote to her son in 2011. A human rights lawyer, she serves several sentences in Iran's notorious Evin prison and is detained today in an even worse women's prison. But she still writes letters to international bodies, receives awards, and has undertaken hunger strikes so severe as to nearly kill her.
Thank you, Sarah. My dearest Nima, writing a letter to you is so very difficult. How do I tell you where I am when you are so innocent and too young to comprehend the true meaning of words such as prison, arrest, sentence, trial, injustice, censorship, oppression, freedom, justice, and equality? Last week you asked me, Mommy, are you coming home with us today? I was forced to respond in plain view of the security agents. My work here is going to take a while longer, so I can't come home now. You nodded, as if to say, you understand. And then you took my hand, giving it a sweet, childlike kiss. How do I explain that coming home is not up to me, that I am not free to rush back to you and your sister? How do I tell you that in reality, no work has the right to keep me away from you for so long? No work has the right to so utterly ignore the needs of my children. My dear Nima, in the past 6 months, I found myself crying uncontrollably on 2 occasions. The first time was when my father passed away, and I was deprived of the chance to grieve and attend his funeral. The second was the day you asked me to come home with you. I returned to my cell and sobbed without control. It goes without saying that it pains me to have to explain to you that I was not seeking in any way to act against the national security of the country, and that as a lawyer, my only objective has always been to defend my clients under the law. What I want you to know, my beloved Nima, is this. Firstly, although I am not the first person to have received such an unjust sentence, I know that it is highly unlikely and wishful thinking on my part. I nevertheless hope that I will be the last. Secondly, I am pleased that if nothing else, I am being held in the same location as many of my clients whom I was unable to defend effectively and who now find themselves behind bars as a result of the illegal judicial process. Thirdly, I want you to know that as a woman, I am proud of the heavy sentence rendered against me and honored to have defended many civil activists. The relentless efforts by women has proven that we can no longer be ignored. I am not sure how to ask this of you, my beloved Nima. How do I ask you to pray for the judge, to pray for my interrogator or the judiciary? Pray, my son, that they find justice and peace in their hearts so that we too can someday be allowed to live in peace like so many other countries in the world. My dearest, what is at stake is the freedom of innocent human beings trampled upon and crushed under the weight of oppression. And so I ask you, my dear Nima, with all your childhood innocence, to pray for the release of all political prisoners and for all innocent prisoners everywhere. Hoping for better days. Love, Maman Nasrin.
What women we have been inspired by. And I'm going to add this. Here's what struck me. We're celebrating heroic women today because their voices are usually the hardest to hear because they have a perspective that's unique, that's half of the perspective of the world. But in each of these women's words, you can hear that they're speaking on behalf not just of women, of men too. Remember, even perpetrators may also be victims of these systems. And I'm going to add this. Forgive me. We can't afford to stop at human rights and countenance the same style of savage abuse perpetrated against other glorious denizens of this earth. That's part of the same system. There's no future for Homo sapiens without them. So here's to the rights of the human and of the more than human. Now, our elders. Let me introduce to you Amir Soltani, writer and documentary filmmaker and fiercely beautiful, far-seeing soul who's helped spearhead international support for Nasrin in particular. Karin Robinson, Director of Human Rights Education at RFK Human Rights, is bringing the young into this current. Indefatigable Karin Deutsch at Karlekar runs the Free Expression at Risk programs at PEN America. Welcome to you all.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Let me just start with a lightning round. I would love to hear where each of you lands in these stories. What particularly grabbed you and pulled you in? I'm seeing Karin now, so let's start with you and then go to Karin and Amir.
Well, I think for me, it was just the power of the words and the universality of the stories. I mean, each one is very specific to the, circumstance of, the own writer's experience, but in a way, the messages are completely universal and could apply to so many different situations. There are many writers, women and men around the world who are forced into exile every year. There's many others who are at risk, but stay in their countries. There are others yet again who are imprisoned because of their words and advocacy and actions. So these are all very specific and unique, but also I would say very universal and global as well. And that's where I think the power lies in that it crosses boundaries and cultures and situations.
Yeah. Karin, is there an image or another or a different reflection that struck you? That
well, Karin certainly speaks my mind on so many fronts, but just the humanity, right? That we, as different as we all are, we are similar, and that we share these basic fundamental human rights. And when they're denied and violated, it doesn't matter where we are in the world, our humanity, our dignity has been attacked. And through such beautiful words and speaking truth to power, there's this common humanity, this common strength, this common power. It was quite beautiful.
It was interesting to me, the theme, a kind of subtext of mobility, physical mobility, right? I mean, there's exile as a forced mobility, but then there's driving, which seems to be so modern, and yet it is a kind of symbol for, the mobility of humans and how linked that is to autonomy. Amir, did you have
I did, Sarah.
An image? Yeah,
I did. It was I've been haunted by the bombing of the Hazara schools in Afghanistan, and reading about it's the Gulistan the Gulistan education of martyrs, which is the graveyard where the girls have been taken. And so when I'm listening to the program today, to the breath that the sisterhood of girls of the next generation was putting into the body and being of others through the word, right? It's this sort of, it's like to be an animal is to have breath and to move, just to connect it to what you were saying. And to breathe life back into words, to breathe life back into language, with the passion that was being done today. Oh, it's just extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's this refusal to bow and bend before those who want the next generation of women, human rights activists, men, to be still silent and dead before power. And I think I've always celebrated PEN, RFK, Amnesty, you for sitting on Golava's desk and saying, no, this isn't the way it's gonna be. So yeah, I get power and energy from it. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that you emphasized the way the readings were done. Also, it really was animated. It was given life. And it's about also the power of the oral in this incredibly, paper and screen focused society. The oral, the human, chest giving voice to principles and emotion. Karin, you have been looking, at some trends around the world. Could you let us in on where today's stories sort of fit within this, the current of abuses of human rights and, of course, of efforts to counter those abuses?
Yeah, no, sure. I'll put on my my academic researcher hat for a little bit and talk about some of the dry numbers and trends. For the past 2 years, PEN America has been putting out a Freedom to Write Index where we look at, we sort of provide a count of the number of writers behind bars globally and the reasons why they're being put behind bars. And when we looked at this sort of gender, breakdown of all the writers, it's over 200 around the world, we realized that interestingly, women comprise a pretty small proportion of all the writers around the world who are in jail. So it's in the last 2 years, it's been about 13 to 16% globally are women. But in several countries, and namely in Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, women make up a much larger proportion of incarcerated writers. And of the almost 40 women who spent time behind bars in 2019, for example, 24 were held in these 3 countries. Now, globally, if you look at, what women are writing and what's getting them in trouble, women around the world are writing about many of the same topics that men do. So that could be government corruption, it could be politics, it could be, various human rights issues. And these issues are getting them in trouble as they get, their male counterparts in trouble. But what we did notice was that about a quarter of the women globally were detained or imprisoned specifically because of their writing and activism about women's rights. And this is particularly common in women who are being detained in Iran and Saudi Arabia, which, as many people know, are 2 countries where there are extreme restrictions on women's personal freedoms. And these are wrapped up in sort of religious and patriarchal narratives of the regimes in both Iran and Saudi Arabia. And women who push back against these rules are particularly subject to being targeted. So this is women such as Nasrin Sotoudeh and Loujain Al-Hathloul, who we highlighted today, and are just examples of the types of women in Iran and Saudi who have dedicated their lives, their writings, and their activism to either expanding or defending women's basic rights. So this did seem to be sort of a trend globally, where we saw that women were, particularly being targeted for their writing and activism to expand rights for all women.
Anyone have reflections? I don't have to just be, launching each of you. Amir or Karin, do you have any thoughts about that? About this trend? If not at the moment, or if I'm not hearing, let me turn to Karin. I loved hearing the voices, as we keep repeating, of our students channeling these women that they admire. Can you talk to us about how the next generation gets brought into this current?
Absolutely. So at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, we have a program called Speak Truth to Power, and we use the stories of human rights defenders, just like we did today, to bring human rights learning into the classroom. I mean, what we've done today is human rights education. And why we do this is because human rights education provides the broadest lens through which to see, to engage with, to understand, and to be in the world. I mean, the full spectrum of human rights touches everything that we are, our civil, political, economic, social, cultural being, are those rights. And so by bringing human rights education into the school systems, what we're trying to do is say, you know, human rights education should be a through line. It should be part of our social emotional learning. It should be part of our civic education. It should be part of how we learn about literature, you know, language arts. Think of the work of these women we heard today. That could be in a literature, that could be in a poetry class, that could be in a, but to bring human rights learning into our schools, not just the content that's delivered, like it's great to have the knowledge, but also in how it's brought into the classroom, right? And so that in the ecosystem of the school is one that brings human rights to life. So how a teacher teaches, and like these young women today, their power in their own learning, their advocacy, their agency, and who they are and the world they want. This is what human rights education is about. And that's what we're trying to do, that there's informed action. You know, there's a great quote by the former, one of the former, I'm blanking on his title right now, which is bad, but he talked about how like a majority of the architects of the Holocaust had PhDs, right? They were very learned people,
Right.
but we can't be satisfied, particularly after what we've seen over this last year, not just in the US, but globally. The pandemic laid bare the inequalities in our world, the violence in our world, the abuses in our world. And it's our deep belief that through human rights learning, through human rights education, the content, the experience of learning will lead to informed action. And like so many of these young women, like owning what you can do to bring about change in an informed, passionate way, protect, promote, defend human rights. And through stories like this, we have windows and mirrors, right? So many of our young women in this country and young men might not ever experience what these women have experienced. But by taking those words, I love Amir, breathing more life into those words, we then have a window into an experience we can't have, but we can take some of it and engage with it in our own ways, in our own communities. Like Eleanor Roosevelt said, where after all do human rights start? In small places. So take action in your school, take action in your community, and let us look not in vain, but with hope in the greater world. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. That's what I believe we need to do. And I think the young women we had here today are prime examples of what can be and what will be.
Tell me, what kind of uptake are you getting in schools, particularly in the public education sector?
Sure. So we are seeing a huge demand. So we do, like this year's been all virtual, but we do programs that are both teacher facing and student facing. And we have teachers coming at us for more and more content on how to do this, how to map this into social studies, how to map this into language arts, how to map this into science, how to make our classrooms and our schools inclusive, reflective, not just Black History Month in February and Gay Pride, right? How do we do that year round? So we're getting, even with the pushback, right, to 1619, to critical race theory, we all know there's huge pushback to that, right? And I think in some places people are like, human rights education, that's really, counter to it. But we're seeing on the ground, people want more and more of this, because I think they get that our world is connected, and the dignity and worth of each and every one of us is critical to the well-being of all of us. So despite some of the populist landscape that we are navigating now, we're still seeing some really great need.
Great, that is really good to hear. Amir, did you want to come back in more explicitly on the notion of iqra, to read, to recite.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
So, I was thinking about what to say and thinking about the whole event today as readings, right? And really, when you think about the first revelation in Islam, which the Prophet gets in the cave of Hira, the angel Gabriel comes to the Prophet and says, read. And the Prophet says, but I cannot read. And the angel holds him tight and says, read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous. And Karin, you'll like this next line. And who taught by the pen, taught man, humans, that which he knew not. And so, the whole essence of the birth of a religion is to read. And what's so fascinating to me about this old history and voices and so on is that when the Prophet then goes to his wife, Khadija, and says, look, this happened. I don't know, am I crazy? Am I not? Whatever. And she says, no. So she participates in revelation. And so right at the very beginning, you have a woman whose role, I haven't come across too many biographies of her, but whose role, the Prophet was her agent. He conducted business on her behalf. She conducted business all across the Middle East. So I think part of what the challenge that we have before us isn't just to hear the voices of women today, but to hear their voices in the past. And if we can't, to imagine their voices. And if we can't see them, to imagine their presence, to insist on their presence, because it can't be that they're not there. And then just a little note, because of you bringing in the question of animals, another little anecdote in Islamic history that really touches me is that, the Prophet was a dissident. He wasn't the Quraysh, the oligarchs of the time were after him. And he flees into a cave, and a spider, whether you believe in it from a religious point of view or from myth or story, a spider weaves a web across the cave. And when the assassins come, they can't be a spider here, and they walk away. And so regardless of how you think of it, a spider's web, something that delicate and small, can change the course of history. The presence of another creature, another living creature. So as we talk and think through human rights, I just wanted to say that there's a lot that we can mine in the past that can also change and shift the way we look at history and we look at the present, because much of the fundamentalist project that we're seeing is based on a vision that women have no space in the past and therefore cannot have any space in the future. And I think that breaking, hearing these voices, reading, insisting on the pen, to be taught by the pen, to have an organization like PEN, to have an organization like RFK, to generate the conversations in and of itself affirms life. So those are the thoughts that I quickly wanted to share on that front. And then to think that, to come to film and the kind of film web that a single film can create. We are here in no small part because of the chain of friendships that Jeff and Marcia have created around Nasrin's film, and the chain of friendships that Lina and Loujain's family have created around her story. And Jeff has been speaking a lot about the importance of these chains and these connections. And I think what we did today was to break the box that Iran is here and Saudi Arabia is there and PEN is here and RFK is there and Amnesty is here. No, we're in this together, and all the different schools are separate. No, we're all in this together. And we don't necessarily have to wait for human rights to be brought to us. We can go to it wherever it may be. So that's a deep thanks to Veronica also for the extraordinary readings. And so that's where I think I want to leave it.
Absolutely fantastic. Any final thoughts from the two Ks? Or shall we move into how to convert this?
One final thought I had hearing the readings actually was for for the women writing who have children, you could see this as like a deep sense of concern about their children, thinking about the future, thinking about the younger generation, and their working on women's rights, on human rights, is in part an effort to sort of improve the situation for the younger generation in their countries, but also so globally. So that really stuck out at me, the sort of focus and concern for the children, and not just their own children, but I would say the whole younger generation.
Exactly.
And I think ties really nicely into our theme today of just trying to connect people across cultures, countries, generations, and figure out ways that everybody can get involved, in helping to support these women, their voices, and pushing for rights around the world in all of these countries, including our own in the US. So that was something that just jumped out at me, particularly hearing some of the readings for the first time.
I think that's really important. And it's not that fathers don't care about their children, clearly, but there is an added complexity if, as a woman, you have children and are engaged in a struggle like this. I mean, it adds a depth and a sense of mission, but it also adds a complexity to the decision to take the actions that will, number one, deprive your children of you and you of your children, and number two, maybe, permanently, right? Or maybe endanger your children in some of these cases. It's a heavy, heavy thing. So I'm really glad you raised that.
Yeah, I think it connects sort of the personal and the political and the tensions between, trying to raise a family and the very grave impacts on the if someone is engaging in this type of activism, it doesn't just affect them, but it affects their entire family. I mean, Nasrin's husband Reza is under threat himself and has faced legal charges. Loujain's family, her entire family, is subject to a travel ban, both in and out of Saudi Arabia. So in many cases, we're only looking at the activists and their struggle, but it honestly affects the entire family, in some cases extended families, and the impact on children can be severe, that in some cases they don't see their parents for decade, it could be up to a decade or more. So it is a very personal struggle, and it's a personal decision to engage in this type of activism, but sort of taking on those risks, knowing the potential impact is incredibly brave, and it's a huge conflict, probably for many of these individuals and families who are having to make decisions. I mean, some of the women whose readings we read today, I know are also raising their children alone. They have no husband to help take care of the children at home if they get taken off into jail or facing grave threats. So it's I do think it is a huge challenge, compromise, for all of these people in it, and it sort of adds this very personal element to this sort of broader struggles for human rights as well.
With that, I think it's time to get concrete about how we convert, this moment into, another little tributary of the current that we've been talking about. I think, Amir, are you going to suggest some very concrete actions?
I am, and I'd like to actually open it to anybody else who, including yourself, who actually has suggestions. The call to action that I'd like to convey is based on a conversation that we had, thanks to Jeff and Marcia, with Reza Khandan, Nasrin's husband, and with Lina, Loujain's sister. Reza has been very clear for the past while and very, very direct about the importance of closing Garchak prison, which is the main women's prison in Iran where Nasrin is being held. The conditions there they're not just unsanitary, they are pretty much diabolical. When women are deprived of fresh air, clean water, food, proper space to rest in. I mean, these prisons are attempts to destroy the human soul and spirit. They're assaults on human dignity. So I think we can generalize from that and look at all the prisons in which the readings and the women today are held, and really focus attention on those. Nasrin herself went on a very long hunger strike to protest the exposure of political prisoners in Iran to COVID, and on every occasion asked that the other political prisoners in Iran be freed. Narges Mohammadi, another prominent activist, is just being sent back to prison with a sentence for lashings and so on. And this aspect of, physical assault on women being sanctified in law and as part of any culture, I just find that absolutely repulsive. And obviously there are many aspects to addressing those. Lena has stressed to us the legal aspects, the way the law functions as a net in which protest is stifled. And she specifically mentioned anti-terrorism laws, because those anti-terrorism laws mean that people like Lena, like Loujain, who are, pushing for driving, end up being treated as terrorists, which is, and treated in courts that are, basically stripped prisoners of defendants of their most basic rights. And the other thing that Lena mentioned is cyber laws, which essentially allow the state to criminalize virtually anyone for something as minor as a tweet. So I think that, more broadly, when you look at what we're dealing with, when you expand this to Xinjiang and places like that, we can't ignore the role of technology in silencing people, in surveillance, in tracking people, and all of those things. On the positive side, what I want to bring up is that, in fact, there has been enormous action for both Nasrin and Loujain and others. In the case of Nasrin, we've had everyone from Kweku Mandela to the Pope calling for her freedom. So this is not, this notion that we human rights defenders are somehow lone voices in the wilderness is absolutely incorrect. Nick Kristof, Jason Rezaian, many journalists, Christian Amanpour, in part thanks to the Nasrin film, have really been, and in part because of Reza and the power of the Iranian human rights community and the power of Iranian women's movement, have really been active. That's not as available to Loujain, unfortunately. So I think that I think that we have the opportunity to connect movements, capabilities, journalists, media across the board. And so I think the heart of, the call to action today for me is to create the connections that we typically don't, to not think of where we are and who we're defending in terms of any box or category or generation or gender for that matter. So that's the call to action that I'd like to share. And of course, people can join the Nasrin and Loujain website, and they can join the RFK, PEN, Amnesty International, and other organizations like this that are spearheading these efforts. And then finally, as an American, I don't think we can leave the Biden administration off the hook to just talk about the nuclear issue, about Iran, or whether they're going to be nice to the Saudi prince or not. I mean, these are fundamental American values that are at stake, that have been trampled on by our own government and by others. And I think it falls on us as the citizenry to put them front and center in terms of everything that we do. Personally, I'm boundlessly grateful to PEN, RFK, Amnesty, also yourself, and to Jeff and Marcia and the Nasrin film for everything they've done to keep this story alive, and all these, and to expand them. So yeah, there are millions of Nasrins being born, millions of Nasrins out there, millions of Loujains, and to count them out is a huge mistake.
Yeah, and this is Karin here. I would just add, because we're trying to sort of engage and activate the younger generation as well. Obviously, social media, retweeting contents, trying to spread these stories and the words and information about the individuals behind bars on any social media platform, I think is incredibly useful. Many of these governments do not like bad publicity and the attention given to these cases helps to keep, the hopes alive of people behind bars, but also helps to keep their names in the news and pick up media coverage and things like that. So, spreading the word on social media is a really important part of this, particularly for, younger teenagers or people in their 20s who may feel they're not an expert. What can I do? And then also, as Amir said, as Americans, I mean, we can reach out to our Congress people. We can encourage them to speak out. It's very, very powerful when we get members of Congress to speak out on these cases, and Penn is engaged in this, but the more a congressperson hears it from their constituents, the more likely they are to take action as well and to join the fight as well. So that's another pretty easy way that we as Americans can speak out. And in other countries as well, there is the ability to engage with political representatives too. So those I think would be the two sort of main avenues, but particularly for the younger generation, I think trying to spread the word on social media, get involved, get engaged. I love what the Teens for Press Freedom are doing in terms of raising some of these issues in the US, and would just encourage more of that. There's many different ways to get engaged at any level.
I think I'm going to come to you just in a second, Karin. Yeah, absolutely. But I just wanted to follow up immediately on Karin to say, I think that some of the potential targets, decision makers in Washington, will be made available on the website. And again, the intent here is today is not a one-off. And so there will be ongoing actions that people can take that will be posted on the website. And as Karin suggested, constituents have more pull with their own members of Congress than others do. But I actually think this could be quite the nonpartisan issue. Now, it's certainly true that American political leaders tend to have kind of, I want to say, selective glasses on their face, and they kind of notice human rights abuses in countries that they dislike for other reasons, and they kind of don't notice the human rights abuses in other countries. But, it would be interesting that's why the juxtaposition of Nasrin and Loujain is so important from a political perspective as well from a moral perspective, because you can say, look, if this is how you feel about Nasrin, you have to have a similar approach to Loujain, despite the fact that one is a quote enemy country of the United States and the other is a quote partner country of the United States. Karin, sorry to cut you off. I apologize.
No problem at all. That was a really important point from a kind of a campaign organizing perspective. And I know we're running tight on time. So all I wanted to say, as a Quaker, we have a saying, let your life speak. And I would just say, think about that when you do anything. Think about what you learned today, the words you heard, the messages, and let your life speak in a way that is about advancing human rights and human dignity for everyone, anywhere. I mean, we need that here. We need that for these women. Let your life speak in a glorious, beautiful way that advances human rights.
And more than human rights, not at the expense of everybody else.
Exactly.
And if I could just drop in something, I also think that it's great that we have human rights professionalized the way it is, but really everyone's a human rights activist. To be human is to be a human rights activist. Yeah. To love is to be a human rights activist. And I just have to come back that love is at the root of it all, right? Why would we do any of this if there wasn't love? And nobody has a monopoly on it, and nobody is an expert on love. It's part of the fabric of this planet. And so I think, this isn't just for doctors can do it, engineers can be human rights. We need all of them. We need everyone in this, students, everyone.
Wonderful. With that, I think we will draw today's really moving moment to a close, and everyone jump in the current. Thank you all very, very much for your participation and for being here with us, even when we couldn't see you.
And thank you so much to all the student readers. You all were absolutely amazing. Phenomenal. And really brought these voices to life. So deep, deep gratitude and thanks for joining in today.
Thanks, everyone. Onward. Here we go.